still, but we'll let some people filter in, and I'll, I guess, give the intro. So, yeah, my name is Max, amateur radio call sign N4ML. I work at the American Radio Relay League, among many other things. I'm an active ham, an extra class.
I got a quick question. Is this session just beginning or ending?
Just beginning. You made it.
So I got a notification that says it's 10 o'clock.
No. Yeah, so, yeah, now my watch out. But, yeah, so today we're here to talk about engaging the next generation of radio amateurs. This is a very poignant question. I see some young faces in the audience, which is good. It's you guys who are trying to keep active in the hobby and all that good stuff.
We don't want to become silent keys too quickly.
So, yeah. So what are we actually going to talk about today, right? It's kind of a big question. How do you engaging the next generation? Well, there's a million different ways to do that, but I find the best way for us here today, and in the short hour we have together, is to talk about, well, who are the next generation, right? And then actually just go over a bunch of different resources available. Of course, all the resources from the ARRL, but there's so many. What's nice about amateur radio is there's so many groups and clubs and programs where they can spend all their time doing exactly what it is they care about, right? And so we're going to talk about some of their efforts as well, and we're also going to talk about what we can do as active amateur radio operators to foster the next generation and kind of bring them into our shared, whether you call it shared madness or shared love of amateur radio. And then hopefully here we'll have some time for Q&A. This is a sort of interactive forum by design, so any questions you have, any thoughts you have, feel free to shoot them in my direction and we'll cover them. So, who are the next generation? Now, by show of hands, coming into this presentation, who thought that the next generation was young hams under the age of 18 or under the age of 21? I'd say most people in the room, that's what they think of. And that is, of course, the next generation. It's, all these young folks that get licensed sort of either in middle school or high school or maybe in college. And, by being the age they are then, that means that in 40 years, they'll still be, somewhat young. And that's what most people think of when they think of the next generation of amateur radio. And oftentimes it's a moniker that sticks, right? There's these groups of young hams that were young at some point, and because they were young then, a lot of people still see them as the young hams now. But there's many other sort of next generation hams that I think are really worth considering and talking about, right? It's someone who gets licensed later in life. There's so many things these days that pull you in different directions and things. Your family comes first, buying a house comes first, doing well in your job. But later in life, as you get used to working and living and keeping a family together, at that point you might finally have time to get back into this amateur radio thing that maybe you were introduced to as a kid, but just never had time to do it. It's also just anybody new to amateur radio or ham radio. The next generation is not necessarily by age, but it's by when they were introduced to the hobby. So if you're 45 or 50 or 35 or whatever, and you find a local club and you get your amateur radio license, well, guess what? Congratulations. You're the next generation too. And what I've found, in my work at the league is there's so many people that, through the many youth programs that are out there today, get licensed, right? They're in high school, they're all jazzed, they have all this free time, being in high school and not having to worry about paying bills. They get their amateur radio license, and then guess what? They go to college. What happens then? Well, now you have to care about your classes, and you start caring about internships, and then you get a job, and then you maybe move somewhere else. But that love for amateur radio usually still exists inside that person, and finally, after they settle down or maybe they even retire, at that point they come back to amateur radio, and I would say that this person too is the next generation. So that's a summary of kind of who we're talking about here. It's young people coming back to amateur radio, and people discovering amateur radio at any age, today. So before I get into what we do at the ARRL to support the next generation, okay, that's good. Our mission is to promote and protect the art, science, and enjoyment of amateur radio, and to develop the next generation of radio amateurs. So that being the mission of the American Radio Relay League, you would expect us to have a whole host of programs to support the next generation, and that we do. So the first one I'd like to talk about, it's one not a lot of people sort of recognize, and that's our student membership programs. So if you're an ARRL member, whether you're a life member or you renew every year, you're all familiar with that $59 a year renewal rate. That's what it is to be an ARRL member today. But if you're 21 or if you're 16, $59 is a lot of money, right? You know, you're probably making $10 an hour at the local grocery store or whatever. And so we have two classes of student membership that we give to those under 21 and those under 26 to give them all the great resources we have at ARRL to get engaged with the hobby at a lower sort of dues, reduced rate. If you're under 21, guess what? You can become an associate ARRL member for free, which gives you access to all of our great magazines, technical information service, and it qualifies you for ARRL scholarships. And we'll get to those in a second. And then if you're under 26, okay, at this point you're probably out of college or maybe entering grad school. We offer a half-price dues rate for you as well at $35. And this is just a nice way to sort of get engaged with what we all do in the hobby. I mean, how many people here read QST? Yeah, I'd expect everybody's hands to shoot up. Now, how many people here have learned something from QST in the past year? So these publications are quite obviously a very valuable resource to have no matter where you are in the hobby today. And so the fact that we're able to sort of give this to the next generation is a great service, and it's something that we're able to do as the National Association for Amateur Radio. But how many of you guys knew that we published 4 magazines, not just QST? I was going to say most of you guys. But, and there's something there for everybody. You know, if you're a double E student and you're going through your bachelor's degree, well, actually a lot of the articles in QEX are things that you might cover in your bachelor's degree curriculum. You know, it's all these subject matter experts that are really going deep into what amateur radio is, sort of technologically. And then, of course, if you're a new ham, On the Air is a great magazine. You know, we kind of dial it back a little bit and look at these things from a 10,000-foot view. You know, we're able to say, well, what is DXing, or what is, Skywarn? And you're able to pick up that information in a very sort of nice way. And then, of course, for all of us contest folks, the NCJ is available there as well.
Are all 4 available to all members?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, they are. In this nice little digital sort of way, so you can pull it up on your phone, or you can print out articles, all that good stuff.
And to clarify, what you can get in print is not all 4 of them, but in print you can
You
get
can get any one in
You can get any one of them.
any one of them.
Any one,
Any one.
or you can.
Or you can buy
the
others.
other 3 in digital.
Yep.
Okay, but I mean, as far as availability, I'm aware of QST and On the Air availability. QEX and NCJ, are they available in print?
QEX is, and NCJ is through the end of the year. We're discontinuing print NCJ in December.
Okay.
But yeah, you can subscribe to all 3 in print. I find a lot of people really do love the digital magazine. And then my last call out here is the technical information service. I find this particularly useful for young hams. Our technical information service, for those not aware, it's an email address and a phone number that goes right to the lab, and whatever questions you have, they'll give you an answer for. And so you're a young ham. Okay, you're living at home with your parents, then you go off to school, and then you move into an apartment or a house with some roommates, and you want to put up a station. You have a backyard, you have a bedroom. What's the best station that you can put up in that space? Well, you might not know, and so you can email or call the technical information service and say, well, here's what I have, here's what I want to spend. What station should I put up that will let me be most effective in XYZ? And they'll come back to you and they'll say, oh, well, in your backyard, you might want to put a ground-mounted vertical if you can get away with that, or if you have some trees. And they'll work back and forth with you to figure out the best solution for whatever it is you want to do. And as a new ham, what you'll find, and what I'm sure every young ham in the room has found, is any question you ask, you get a million answers for it, right? And so it's nice to have this sort of single source of information. So I talked about those ARRL scholarships. Now, has anybody in the room received an ARRL scholarship? Good. So this is a very neat program we're able to do through the ARRL Foundation, and I have some stat lines up here. In 2026, we had over 163 different scholarships for a total issuance of about $780,000 of scholarship to a few hundred students this year. And this is a great way, to sort of, a good way to think about it is, how can you incentivize amateur radio, as people get to their careers? Obviously, your career and your schooling comes first, right? But ARRL scholarships, as those that have played the scholarship game recently know, are, scholarships are increasingly harder and harder to get outside of whatever you may get by your GPA or SAT score or whatever. And so we're sort of uniquely angled to say, oh, you're a ham? Apply for our scholarships and we'll see which ones you get. And it's for all different qualifications of radio amateur. Now, what scholarship did you receive? No, I'm putting you on the spot.
ARDC one.
Yeah, so exactly. So the Amateur Radio Digital Corporation provides us with a lot of money every year to issue scholarships for those sort of hams and students that are interested in and do things that ARDC likes to support. But we also have the PVRC scholarship, so the Potomac Valley Radio Club, who does a lot of amateur radio contests, has a scholarship that they've sort of targeted for those in PVRC member territory that are students going to college. And if you know CW, the CW Ops has a scholarship program as well through us. And what's nice is, could all of these organizations run their own scholarship program? Well, yes, right? Obviously they have the money to do it. But by working with us at the ARRL for our scholarship program, your scholarship has a much higher likelihood of getting into a student's hand. And as a student, your life just becomes so much easier. You fill out one application, and you give a summary of who you are as a ham and as a student, right? So, I'm going to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I have a 3.8 GPA, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good student. Or, I really enjoy CW, traffic nets, or whatever it is. Or I live in North Carolina. We take all this information and we score it against all the 150 plus scholarships we have on offer. And more than likely, you're a student, whether you are a student in this room or students that are going to school, will qualify for one of them, right? The odds are quite good. But there's two requirements. There's that student that you have to be an ARRL member, but you can be an ARRL member for free, as I just talked about a little bit earlier. And you have to be, you have to be an amateur radio operator, right? So it's a neat program we're able to offer, and we've seen great success with it over the years. So another one. So I'm guessing you're in college, right? And I know you're in college. So the Collegiate Amateur Radio Program. This is a program we run at ARRL to engage, specifically college students with amateur radio. This takes the form in a couple of different ways: a monthly meeting online, and it also takes the form of some in-person meetups at shows like Dayton Hamvention and things of that nature. I think we met up at CPAC this year too. And so, why have a collegiate amateur radio program? Well, this is a nice way to sort of get all people of the same mind together, right? So we have collegiate club presidents, club members, faculty advisors. All these guys meet up once a month and just talk shop, right? What are you doing in your club at Cornell University that we're not doing at University of Texas, and how can we work together to make better collegiate clubs? We've had people come to collegiate amateur radio program calls that have no idea how to start a club, and we give them the resources to go from zero to hero, so to speak. And it's, I mentioned here, it's colleges of all types, shapes, and sizes, from community colleges to Ivy League schools to graduate programs, everything from, all types of schools. And so what makes CARP neat too is it's a nice way for us at ARRL to kind of get a census of, well, what are these sort of college-aged kids actually doing with amateur radio? And I'll tell you, it's a lot of very interesting stuff. And it's not things you would think about, but they always, without fail, they'll get on a CARP call and they'll talk about something I've never done before or heard of. And they're having great success with it in their local club and all that other stuff. So in addition to some of the ARRL programs we had on offer, we talked about, the student memberships, the student scholarships. As I alluded to in the beginning of this, amateur radio is great because it's a worldwide community. And so anybody that has any interest in anything in particular can go in and say, well, we want to support this part of the hobby. And so one of, a great organization, the Northern California DX Foundation. Do we have any DXer types in the room? A couple of you guys. They say, well, if we want more people to DX, we have to support young DXers and DXpeditioners, and so there's a grant program for that. So, I see some young kids in the room, and if you're under 26 and you want to go on a amateur radio trip to somewhere in the world, the Northern California DX Foundation will give you money to go there. Kind of sounds like one of those scams you get over email of, oh, I'm going to send you, $10,000 and, you're going to do something. But the NCDXF thing is real. And it's a great program that's on offer for, young kids. Another group is Youth on the Air. Do you have any Youth on the Air people in the room? Well, that's great. So Youth on the Air is another sort of program. It was originated over in Europe. And the idea was, well, the easiest way to get youth involved in amateur radio is to make the youth involve themselves in putting everything together. So it started over in ARRL Region 1, came over to here in the US and over in Asia and all that good stuff. And it's kind of a regional hub for youth and amateur radio. There's a Yoda table out in the exhibitor area here at Huntsville, and yeah, it's just kind of the idea is it's by kind of by youth for youth, right? And they do a couple of neat programs. They do the yearly Yoda camps. This year's was in Huntsville, and the idea here is, well, what if we get all young hams between a given age range? Let's say 13 to 25. Let's put them all in the same place for about a week, and let's put some programs together, maybe do an ISS contact, and let's see what's going to happen. And so they've done that for the past 4 or 5 years now, and it's been pretty successful. And they've also introduced some junior Yoda camps, because there are hams younger than 13 that exist, and they want to meet all the other hams under 13, and they've started to run those as well. And what kind of makes Yoda, yes?
Where are these camps?
So the Yoda camps are hosted all over the U.S. once a year. The program director there, Neil Rapp, likes to kind of move them around, and so this year it was in Huntsville. Last year it was in Denver in 2025. In 2024 it was in Nova Scotia. In 2023 I believe it was in Ohio. And so they kind of like to move it around every year just to, it's a lot easier for somebody in, North Dakota to get to Denver than it is for them to get to Nova Scotia, and vice versa. And so the idea with sort of the Youth on the Air organization is, at the ARRL, we support young hams and we give them all the resources they need to succeed. Youth on the Air then goes and says, okay, well, you guys are all doing things and getting together. How can we make sure that you guys know each other, right, and interact and all that good stuff? They also support programs like the youth contesting program. I don't know if we have any contesters in here, but the idea is that, if you're 18, you probably don't have a contest station. You probably don't even have a big radio station. Maybe you've been able to put a dipole on the roof, or maybe a vertical in your backyard like I was talking about earlier. But you're not going to have a 100-foot tower or anything of the sort. And so the youth contesting program from Youth on the Air goes and says, well, there's so many people with good stations, surely they're not using them all the time, right? And so they work out deals and work with the amateur radio community to say, hey, can a bunch of 16 to 25-year-olds come to your house for some random weekend to operate a contest? And so that's another one of those sort of youth-driven programs, right? It wasn't started by Youth on the Air. They didn't say, oh, we're going to do this. There were young hams involved with Yoda that said, we want this, let's try to make this happen. And that's what Youth on the Air enables these hams to do.
As a kind of a tangent to this, if you want to, this is great, you've got the camps and stuff. If you want to assist local school systems, I got involved in 1962 at 12 years old because a guy by the name of Ed came to my junior high and talked up ham radio, and that's how I got involved. What resources can the ARRL provide to that effort?
That's a good tangent. So, and something I missed in my presentation, so good call for reminding me. I shouldn't have, because I work in that office. But a great ARRL resource that exists today is the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology. Now, who here is in school still? I think I can kind of point at the people.
Teaching or
well, and do we have any teachers in the office, in the room too? I know we have a couple. So, what if I told you you could come up to Newington for 4 days and learn everything you need to know to bring amateur radio into the classroom. And not bring amateur radio into the classroom in the sense of, well, how do I start a school club? But bring amateur radio concepts to your science, math,
Bingo.
history, all those classes.
Yeah. Bingo.
And geography, exactly.
Yep.
And so that's what the ARRL Teachers Institute, is designed to do. You can find out information actually at our booth. We have an education booth over there. But the idea being that Teachers Institute takes a teacher. We take groups of teachers of about 15 to 20. In 4 days, you go from whatever you know about amateur radio today, which for those in this room is probably more than average, if I'm being honest. And then you go and you learn about, HTs, antennas, satellite contacts, all this stuff. You do hands-on projects, you learn how to solder. And if you don't have a technician license, when you get into TI, you have one by the time you leave, because the study regimen we give everybody. And you get about $1,400 worth of free stuff. Too, that helps. And we reimburse your flights, we pay for your hotel, we give you a per diem for food. It's kind of a good deal. But what you have to do on your end is take all that stuff back to the classroom and act as a force multiplier. Could I go to every school in the United States over the next 10 years? Probably.
There's a lot of schools.
But regardless, I would be significantly less successful than just one teacher and one school. A teacher sees anywhere from 20 to 40 students in a class in any given year. And if they can share their love for amateur radio to their class, maybe a few kids will say, oh, well, I'm really interested in this. This sounds like fun. And maybe out of them, a few of them will say, well, I didn't even know I could do this, and maybe that becomes their career path. I know you've been to Teachers Institute. Do you have anything you want to add?
Go. The best.
And can you speak to the value of sort of what you've done with it?
I started the school club, and they're fired up. I had a kid walk into my classroom just before I came here, and he said, my name's Josh. I heard you guys have a club. And by golly, it's bigger this year than it was last year. The kids run the show as much as they can. I drive the bus. I'm the one who got the radio through a grant from ARRL. Me and the janitors are putting the antenna on the roof, but the kids are using it. They love it. Our Earth Space Science class is using data that we get from a sounding rocket that we send up with a radio in it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's kids are learning Morse code and talking to me in Morse code in the hallways. That's creepy. But, so, yeah.
What age?
High school, 9 through 12. 2 8th graders came to me and said, can I join your club as a middle school kid? I said, you can, but I can't get you here. So, one of them found a way.
Yeah. There's your answer. It's the ARRL Teachers Institute of Wireless Technology. So, another resource, and one that everybody here is probably quite familiar with, but is your local club. It's oftentimes, if you're a young ham, it's probably the last place you'll look, right? You'll look online and you'll search around and maybe your local club doesn't have a website or, they only have some postings online. But it's a great source of resources for a couple of key things. I can speak to my time in my local club in Charleston, South Carolina, and what my local club provided at the time was just this massive sort of knowledge base for sort of cursory information on whatever I wanted to know. And oftentimes, hey, just borrow this thing and try it out. Your local community is probably the closest people to you that have any interest in amateur radio, right? And so they're probably the closest people that have whatever HF radio you're interested in or have worked with whatever antenna design that you're kind of exploring. And so, by being a part of your local club and saying, I'm interested in all this stuff, but what's the difference between a dipole and a vertical? Well, yeah, you could Google and say, what's the difference between a dipole and vertical? And you could read it in a book. But you go to your local club and they may say, oh, we want to find out what the difference is, and let's go do a Parks on the Air activation. We'll put up a dipole and then we'll put up a vertical. And it's also a great source of experience. There are people in local clubs that have been doing amateur radio for longer than most young people have been alive, right? And when you know a thing or two because you've seen a thing or two. And so instead of every ham radio operator making the same exact pitfalls, You know, you can say, hey, I'm trying to do this, and before you make that mistake, your local club can say, hey, you might want to not do that, or do it in this way. And something I also touched on with some of the other slides here, you know, it's a great sandbox for learning not just about amateur radio, but about the things that we all have to deal with in the real world, right? You know, being on the officer board of a club is a great way to sort of learn by a trial of fire what it's like to be in an officer board meeting or meet with a board of directors. You know, I mean, I learned Robert's Rules of Order because I was involved in a local club, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'll say it that way. It's also a great way where, you know, something that I've heard time and time again from young hams, you know, whether they're older now or they got into the hobby when they were young, is amateur radio was kind of the first place that they were treated like adults. In the sense of, you have an idea, you want to do something kind of neat or new, like, hey, let's go to this place for field day instead of the old place. Well, in school, you make proposals like this, and they, you know, don't really take you seriously often, right? You know, your school administration or whoever it is will say, oh, that's just some kid doing something. But your ham radio club will say, yeah, that's a great idea. You should make it go happen. And you say, okay, well, now what? But by doing that a couple of times, and you know, taking the lead on some of these efforts, you learn all your leadership skills and kind of figure out, well, what does it take to put on an event, right? What does it take to put on a Hamfest? You know, how do you do a group event? And this is all stuff that, you know, maybe you'll learn later in life, right? You get involved in college clubs or in other professional clubs, but your amateur radio club will more often than not just kind of let you run wild with it, and they'll might even give you a budget to make it happen. Bless you. And so this is for everybody in the room that is over the age of 26. Most people here, but it's how can we foster the next generation of amateur radio? You know, how many people here have met a young person in their local area that is an amateur radio operator? Good amount of people. How many of them have come back to your club meeting after meeting them? Once again, but a good amount of people, but it's less hands in the air. Why is that? Why are there's plenty of youth in ham radio. I see them in this room today, and you'll see them all over the Hamfest. But where are they when it's time to do a club field day? Or where are they when, you know, it's time to get on for a contest? Well, part of making sure that young people stay interested in amateur radio is being there sort of as the Elmer and saying, how can I help out? You know, there's so many efforts and initiatives from so many people that have, you know, their hearts in the right place. But the easiest way to help young hams is to ask them what they need from you. And do whatever you can to encourage whatever it is they're doing. Young hams might not talk the way you do, they may not do things the way you do, but that's good, right? It's nice to have a difference of opinion. But what they need is help. You know, how do I put up a station? How do I pass traffic on a traffic net? You know, how do I do a parks on the air? What is that thing? And so the best thing that people like us that have sort of established themselves in amateur radio can do is to really encourage and enable the young people around you. And I saw so many hands in the air, so I know that yes, there are young people around pretty much all of you. And so it's things that, you know, you might not have thought of, right? You know, and if they say, oh, I'm interested in this DXing thing, well, invite them to your station. Say, hey, there's this DXpedition that's going to be on. Come over, you know, on a weekend or an evening, and let's try to work with them. Let's see what that's like, you know. If you're a contester and they say, oh, I'm interested in doing this contesting thing, well, say, well, I have a good contest station. Just come over for the weekend, you know, we'll do like a multi-op thing, and I'll kind of show you how it all works. If you do Parks on the Air, take them out on a Parks on the Air activation with you, you know. And encourage them to do things that they wouldn't think about, right? You know, the example I pull from here is with POTA and SOTA and all that stuff, and a lot of people think, oh, well, it's amateur radio, and so you need a radio transceiver and an antenna and all this stuff, and that's going to be way too expensive. But for those in the room that have done QRP POTA activities, you know, say, well, have you thought about building a radio for POTA? Have you thought about building an antenna? You know, as I said earlier, you know, it's years of experience beat everything else, right? You know, when you've been in the hobby for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, anybody in here? You've just seen so much that young people haven't. And you can be there and say, well, when I was your age, I would have really loved if I had been introduced to this. And you can talk about it. And then by being in this presentation today, I hope you've seen sort of some resources and things that you hadn't heard of before, but now you know about them. And so the next time you run into that young ham, you can say, well, I heard about this thing at the Huntsville Hamfest, and yeah, you're young, and you may want to go to this Yoda camp, or apply for an ARRL scholarship, or, oh, I know you're in college, you should come to a carp call, right? And yeah, you don't know about all this stuff until you know. So I went way too fast.
Just do it again.
Just waste time for Q.
Well, that's great. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, and so we'll start with you.
Not so much questions, much of a statement. I thank you first of all for this great presentation. I was a Cub Master and Scout, so ASMR, I was Scouts for years, and I'm not in Scouts anymore, but I'm still a radio merit badge counselor. Every other year for a while, my club would bring the trailer to the Scout building, wherever we were at, 30-foot mast, and we would work, kids would work China, Spain, France, Canada. They were so super excited when they did that, but then after that, I tried to get them to come to the club or for a meeting just to check it out, but I don't know, getting them from that point on has been difficult.
It's the hardest part.
I mean, every time I've done it, I thought I had 2 or 3 kids who were really interested, but then it fizzles down. I try to keep contact with through that Cub Master.
That's the hardest part. You know, if anybody's done like door-to-door sales or something, you know, what's the hardest part of selling something?
Yeah, because it's every October, the first weekend of every October, Scouts on the Air.
Yeah.
Israel, we talk to a lot, but again, it's just trying to keep them interested. So.
Yeah, it's the hardest part.
Keep planting the seeds. He mentioned somebody came to his class,
Yeah.
and then you're planting seeds to grow tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it. You know, it's they may not immediately become a ham the moment they hear China on 20 meters during the night, but they know it exists.
Right.
Yeah. Later on, they may get interested.
We have a small club down on the coast, and it seems like we have a hard time getting anybody interested in amateur radio. They go, we have a phone, why do I need radio? And a lot of these kids they don't remember 2005 when Katrina hit, and there was no cell phone for days, weeks, and months, depending on where you lived. And so I'm not sure how to bring in new people to the club if they don't even know about our club or about what radio we do. So how would you go about broadcasting what we can do, in an area that's really not terribly interested until something happens like
Your area is not isolated. Northwest Alabama is exactly the same way.
It's all about being.
Tornado every month.
It's about being everywhere. It is what it is. You know, does your local area have like a local Hamfest?
We used to, but nobody.
But I know what you do have. If you're in the South, you have a county fair.
True, we do. We've
Right.
done county fairs and we had a little bit of interest, but when push came to shove, nobody really.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where you're right. You know, nobody cared about amateur radio in most parts of Louisiana. And then Katrina came, and suddenly they were like, well, that's great that we have all these ham radio operators that are here to serve communications. Look at the response of the amateur radio community to Hurricane Helene, right? That was another one of those of like, well, why do we have this repeater on the mountain? You know, it's just kind of sitting there. Why do we spend all this money on giving it backup power? Well, it was kind of convenient to have it, you know, after the hurricane, right? And so it's just one of those, you know, you have to remind people. And how do you remind people? Well, whenever you see people or you're at a non-amateur radio event, you know, you say, hey, well, you know, we're here, we do this, we've done this before. You know, we're here to meet your needs in this specific thing. And so it's hard, right? Because I mean, it's a lot of sort of call and response where there's no response. But as long as people kind of keep amateur radio in the back of their minds, you know, that's kind of the right way to go about it.
Yeah,
Gentleman over here.
Yes.
Sort of tangentially related. It seems to me, and I think Malik has some comments on this, is that with younger people focusing in on doing things like 20-meter contact to China isn't that appealing because of internet, cell phones, etc. But the hobby is broad.
Yeah.
And so what are alternative ways to get people involved in the hobby?
Yeah. So I'll repeat the question, but basically it's, you know, in today's amateur radio operators, young people may not have the same enjoyment of like a 20-meter long DX contact as some people in the room here may have, right? And so what other sort of avenues are there to introduce amateur radio to younger people? And that's a great question. You know, as I said, young hams are doing a lot of things that, you know, no other hams are doing. And amateur radio itself is a hobby that's a mile wide and a mile deep, is a good way to put it, right? Some success that we see with the Teachers Institute program is actually not even really amateur radio, but it's actually amateur astronomy. You know, with very simple pieces of equipment, you can, you know, do radio astronomy things, and you know, that's kind of a nice, easy call and response, to use that phrase again, of, oh, well, if I point this horn-looking thing at this part of the sky, well, I'll get some information out of it, and, oh, well, that's the Milky Way galaxy. You know, that's kind of cool. It's a lot more of sort of the makery, hands-on stuff is what a lot of young people get enjoyment out of, even if it's not pure amateur radio, right? It's, oh, well, I can, you know, build this kit, you know, and learn how to solder, and, you know, it's an Arduino project that uses radio. Well, yeah, it's probably not using ham radio stuff. It's probably using some ISM something or other. But it's still radio, and you can reinforce that concept of, well, you could do this more if only you had an amateur radio license. Another community of younger folks, you know, of younger here, meaning kind of under 40, that has seen a great adoption of amateur radio once introduced is the hacker community, right? I'm sure everybody here remembers, you know, maybe Kevin Mitnick or, you know, all these people that got in trouble for various different things. But sort of hackers and makers and amateur radio operators, you know, there's this Venn diagram where they all meet in the middle, right?
Yeah. Doomsday.
And nowadays, you know, it's a very viable career path to be in cybersecurity or to be in computer science. And so many of these, you know, hackers like hams have their own events, you know, like DEF CON or Hackers on Planet Earth, where they go and they kind of share their love of hacking. And a lot of these guys, once introduced to amateur radio, really fall in love with it, you know, as like, oh, well, this is neat. You know, it's like I play with radio stuff, but never with this much power, right? Or never pointed at the moon, you know. But yes, that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted, for coming from a youth ham, to kind of go with that question a little bit with an answer somewhat with the digital, with the, you know, the age of the internet and everything. One big thing that got me into the hobby was remote operation with a service called Remote Ham Radio Youth Network. And I always tell any youth who are getting into it that have issues with, you know, setting up a station or something that, hey, check out that, because you can get on there. They give you a radio, like you have a selection of different remote stations that you can just operate from. And that kind of addresses a little bit with the age of internet, because then you have, well, it is on the internet, it's very easy to access, and it helps me get into the hobby much easier. And then of course there's also digital modes, and that's been a big number two too.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, great point. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I know, kind of like gestured vaguely.
My name is Mike.
correct.
I have 2 comments and a question,
Yeah.
and mostly for the whole group. 1, thank you for doing this. Number 2, suggestion for reaching out. Sir, if you have members who might be members of the PTA, or if you go to a school board meeting and just present yourself, make a notice and say, hey, we're having field day. We'd love to have people come down, do get on the air for the young kids. That's a way, because sometimes people are oblivious to what we do, and sometimes we have to push a little bit to get in. And through the PTA might be a great way to do that. My question for you and for other people who are here, I think about for field day, you're inviting mostly scouts or groups that are affiliated with emergency services, but you're bringing young children in. One of the things that parents have a concern of is like, are these people, do they have a background check? So I was wondering if there are clubs, how they do it, because we don't do it. I've done it for other organizations, but just suggestions or things that have worked for people to say, hey, the people you're meeting today, they've been vetted, they're good with the state, so people feel more comfortable bringing their kids there.
Yes.
So that was just a question.
Yeah.
Okay. To that end, let me just tell you what we're doing. Several of us have reached an age that being outside in the heat doesn't work well for us. So we actually work at our church because we can set up the antennas outside, but then go inside the air conditioning and operate that way. But it gives us an opportunity to put the word out to church-wide. This is what we're doing. We'd love to have you come out. And so every time we do this, we have several church members come out to see just what is this stuff. And in some cases, they're coming to the church because they're trying to set up their classroom for Sunday or whatever. But it gives us a chance to show other people a little bit more. Because we're a small club, we basically do a Saturday-only operation, so we are out of the way of the church facilities come Sunday morning.
Sure.
And that works fairly well for us. And again, we get a bit more exposure and some exposure to some of the youth groups and the younger kids as well. They at least know we exist and they know a couple of people they can talk to. And enough of us are involved in the church that essentially we are vetted because we're members there as well.
Right.
Okay, so I think it's working for us. I'm not saying we've drawn a ton of members in, but we're getting exposure.
Exposure's good.
Yeah, the background check question's a great one, and it's one a lot of parents of students look for. And it's such a hard thing to answer. There's, it seems like there's a million ways to get a background check, and there's a million other ways for people to say, well, I don't like that one, or you need this one.
Right.
So you end up with kind of like a Soviet general, right? You have so many different background checks you've had to get, for all the different programs and stuff. Like you could argue, oh, well, I have TSA pre-check, so I've been cleared by the federal government to not be a flight risk, right? But that doesn't really work, does it, right? But then you can say, well, I'm a teacher. That usually works, right? But then you might say, oh, well, I'm there's so many different ways to kind of get a background check of some sort, and some of them are valid and some of them aren't. I think the biggest thing you can do is just say, well, you're welcome to be there. I can say at the field days I've been to, I've toured around a bunch of them, oftentimes it's the parent with the student. And, even if that means that they can only be there for half an hour or an hour instead of, what everybody envisions, right? Which is that one kid that maybe you remember that one field day that sat at the GOTA station for 4 hours or whatever. But, it's about sort of meeting the parents where they are with their kid,
As a thought about that, we have the Raptor, it's called the Raptor system. Any volunteer comes into the school, they have to get a very, very light, but nonetheless a screen, right?
Yeah.
And they get a sticky sticker that goes on them. Our local ham radio club, the Hoosier Hills Ham Club, isn't part of us. But all those guys turns out, are alumni from our school because they're just local cats. When we work with them together, I invite them to come to our school to do a thing, and they get a Raptor check. And now, whenever any of my parents ask, because I've asked, well, let's all go hang out at 65-year-old Joe's house, Saturday night. What could go wrong with all my? It's a creepy thing, right? But like, who are these people? But I can now tell them, and so can the president of the HHHC. He can say, all the attendees have been Raptor checked by the NLCS, the North Lawrence Community Schools District. And not to mention, we all have an FCC license.
Of course.
We're all on tap with the Gov, right?
What
So,
else could you ask for?
I just wanted to make a comment. I am sort of, I'm not the oldest, you know, I'm not the youngest. I'm sort of in the middle, but the whole question of like, how do you get them involved? It's hard because you started in 1960 something and what excited you then doesn't excite the internet age. So we sort of have to say, what does excite them? And we have to learn that. We have to learn the digital.
Girls. Girls. Why else?
The older people can't say, well, this is what I like about it, and that, you know, I don't understand that newfangled hacking. Like, you have to sort of learn about the hacking or whatever it is.
Exactly.
To then say, to appeal to what they want.
It's a good exercise. Yeah, you figure out, oh, well, wait, I didn't know you could do that with ham radio, but.
the kids do.
So one comment, one question. If you will reach out, my wife is the 4-H agent for Etowah County in Alabama. And your 4-H agent through your county extension service is always and forevermore looking for after-school clubs. And they have, in order to do that, they'll put you through 4-H online, which will give you a background check.
There was something on QST just a month ago about 4-H, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there was.
So they are forevermore looking for that. My question is, as I've done little electronics club through 4-H, I've got kids who ask me constantly about licensure, and I would love if there is an effective little curriculum or something that we can use to walk kids through getting that technician license.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily sort of youth-oriented in the sense, but in the sense that the technician license probably tops out at about a high school reading level as far as the copy, and, you know, the concepts are, well, the concepts, right? You know, our ARRL registered instructor program puts together every 4 years a technician PowerPoint slide deck, right, of 9 slide presentations that follow the 9 chapters of the ARRL license manual. And so that's a nice way to format it, right? Because, you know, we could probably spend the next 2 hours talking about what's the best way to study and get your amateur radio license. Because there's a million ways to do it, but the presentations with the license manual as reinforcement is very helpful because you can stand up there, like I'm doing here, and you can say, okay, well, we're going to talk about Ohm's Law. Blah, 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 here's Ohm's Law. And then the way this presentation is structured is after every topic, we then get into the questions directly related to that topic. And so, oh, well, voltage is equal to amperage times resistance, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now you have, 13.8 volts. With 2 amps, what's the resistance? And oh, well, we just covered that, and so you're gonna blah, 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 and that's the correct answer. So that's a nice way to do it from sort of a presentation. That's what we suggest to all the instructors. With 9 slide decks, you can do either, all of them in one day if you have a full sort of 8 or 10 hour day, or you can break it up and you can do 1 or 2 a week. And then, 9 presentations, 9 weeks of school, almost lines up. So that's what I would recommend, but then what I also recommend is, once you get access to any slide deck, is after you run it for the first time, take it apart. Figure out what worked, what didn't, make changes. These instruction things are kind of living documents, right? So, yes.
To that idea, I've looked for years for youth-specific licensure curriculum, and nothing. So my younger son finally got licensed at 10 years old, mainly because he got the ARRL done and he watched all the David Tyler videos that are out there, and then he just muscled through, taking practice exams, and did it. But we've got all sorts of different businesses that trying to spin up, hey, get your tech license, whatever, and nobody's clued in on this vastly underserved section of
True. Yeah, question, yes, sir.
Something I actually did for our yearly thing out there, I live in Davidson County, which is the Nashville area, but in Sumner County where I attend college, that college has an FM broadcast station. So I actually use that FM broadcast station to say, come out to field day, where the college students would actually be able to hear that announcement.
Yeah. These college radio stations are quite popular right now. Yeah. But yes, are you finding any success?
We didn't have any this year. Granted, I was only doing it 2 weeks before that happened. So next year, the plan is there's a what they call in the business a rotator. So like it's not only being announced only when I'm doing a show.
Good.
It'll be in the rotator to where any time of the day we can say, "Hey, this is happening."
Yes, sir.
Two things. One is that a lot of these guys are interested in projects like the Arduino projects, the Pi projects, the SDR projects, stuff like that. And it's at some point, you're going to get to the point where you need to transmit.
Yeah.
And you can't do that without a ham radio license. So that kind of is a point of, listen, dude, you want to keep playing with us, you're going to have to get the license.
Yeah.
The second, which I found out through some AI, and I'm not military, so I'm going to use the wrong terms, is that there is a military occupational specialty test that is functionally similar to the technician class amateur radio license. And if you walk, even absent that, if you're looking for a job in cybersecurity or something like that, and you walk in there with a ham radio license, you've automatically established a credential that they probably want.
Yeah.
So even if you're interested in that kind of a career, you might want to get the ham radio license, not because you want to talk on 20 meters, because you want to get a freaking job.
Yeah.
One place I worked, there was a department, test department, they wouldn't hire you if you didn't have a ham ticket.
Interesting.
I want to just add that last year I demonstrated Parks on the Air for my club at a local historical park by me in Philadelphia. And of course, that was the day the son decided to have a big giant fart. And the bands were terrible. But at the park, there was also a group of scouts camping. And I was very happy to see a couple of the scouts kept coming down every half hour, 45 minutes or so, just to see how many more contacts we made. After the initial explanation of what we were doing, and they were interested. And I said, this is what we don't know. I didn't know at 3 a.m. in the morning or so, just before I got up, the son decided to have a hiccup and shut down the bands. It took 4.5 hours to make 11 contacts. But I did get a chance to show it to the public, even to a park ranger who was coming by and patrolling. So I see about Pennsylvania, they're very accepting the Parks on the Air.
It's Pennsylvania on the air.
All right, well, there's 8 minutes left. I think the next presentation is all about Aries. Is the presenter here? Yes. So it'll be a good one. I wish I could stick around for it. Yes, sir, Joe.
Marconi.
Oh, yes. Before you guys all go, who here is in a club? Who here wishes their club did XYZ? Come to the ARRL booth, come to the clubs area, ask about Marconi. Marconi is a program where your club can go from sitting around every Friday at the Cracker Barrel to doing Parks on the Air, doing big field days. Check it out. Thank you.